outlined by the 13th century Jewish occult system known as the Kabbalah, as expounded in the Zohar and expanded upon by the 18th century Hasidic movement. You see, this so-called divine presence at the Wailing Wall is actually the Kabbalistic feminine emanation of their false god, the Shekinah. Watch closely how the rabbis thrust their pelvises and penises back and forth in a prescribed prayer movement called davening, in which the Jew copulates with the Shekinah in order to give birth to an erotic union with the Ein Sof, the Kabbalistic masculine emanation of their false god. Now watch this young Jewish boy who, instinctively knowing that davening is a lewd and embarrassing act, just can't bring himself to perform the thrusting of his pelvis. My friends, for Rand Paul and for so many other saps like McCain, Bush, Obama, Clinton, and Romney, to perform the rite of political passage at the Wailing Wall is nothing less than to shake hands with the devil. And if God doesn't dwell in temples made by human hands, as the Bible tells us, much less would he dwell in a Roman fortress. The hoax is on. Not only are our politicians selling their souls to the Jews at a Roman fortress named Fort Antonia, misnamed the Western Wall, they're participating in a lewd occult ritual where the so-called divine presence is actually Satan himself. Satan's seat is at the Wailing Wall, and our politicians, brought there by the Jews, are carrying him all the way back home to America. The Wailing Wall is actually the remains of a Roman fortress named Fort Antonia, built north of the actual temple site, where no protruding rock ever existed, but rather was built upon the Gihon Spring. The rock upon which the dome of the rock was built, adjoining the Western Wall, was actually the centerpiece around which Fort Antonia was built. There's nothing sacred about this rock or this wall. This is attested to by the eyewitness Jewish historian Josephus, who also wrote in his Jewish Wars that the Romans left nothing above or below ground of the Second Temple, so that one coming to Jerusalem thereafter would never believe a temple ever existed. According to Josephus, Titus, the Roman general who razed Jerusalem to the ground in 70 AD, allowed Fort Antonia to remain to house the 10th Legion, left to monitor Roman affairs in Jerusalem. And thus the prophecy of Christ, not one stone will be left upon another, was fulfilled. God will not be mocked. Let God be true, and the Jews liars. If you still don't believe me, then get the book, The Temples That Jerusalem Forgot, by Professor Dr. Ernest Martin, and you'll surely be convinced.
Community themselves, they have voted Tel Aviv as the #1 place in the world. Not San Francisco, not New York, but Tel Aviv.
We were established for the establishment of Israel. Our markings are all over. Take out $1 out of your pocket. Look at the Great Seal. You'll notice in between the wingspan of the eagle, you will see the Star of David, made out of 13 stars. Now, why is the Star of David there?
Around that star is the Shekinah glory cloudburst, symbolizing the Shekinah glory that was over the tabernacle. George Washington said, "I want that to be on the dollar so that people will recognize the contribution that the Jewish people have made to the United States of America."
Not only are today's Christians being taught to be pro-Jewish and pro-Israel, the strange doctrines of the Talmud and the Kabbalah are also creeping into churches and being taught as Christian doctrine. For example, many pastors will use the term Shekinah as if it were something from the Hebrew Old Testament, when in reality, the word is never found in the Bible one time.
So the Shekinah refers to the divine presence.
And it's a feminine word, by the way. It's not masculine.
For example, if Moses de Leon had come out and said, "I have an idea, God is a woman," that might not have gone over so well. But now he was saying that the ancient Rabbi Shimon was teaching us about Shekinah, the feminine half of God, and her romance with her divine partner, the Holy One, blessed be He.
So there is a belief that God could be both male and female.
The Shekinah is the indwelling presence of God in the universe. It's what emanates from the being of God. But for Jews, Shekhinah and God are one and the same, and it is almost forbidden to separate them.
Okay.
God simply manifests himself or herself in the form of the inspiration of the Shekhinah.
Shekinah is something that's part of the Talmud, something that's part of Judaism, not Christianity. And yet, how many Baptist preachers have used that phrase, Shekinah glory, in church, and it's not even scriptural?
Friends, we need to grasp this, that the Shekinah glory is in us. This presence that we talked about, this presence that came in this upper room to the disciples, this Shekinah glory, it's in us as believers.
The Bible is clear from Genesis to Revelation that God is a he, not a she. And to teach that God is both a he and a she, you've got a different God. The Christian Bible teaches that man was made in the image of God. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, the Bible says that a man ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. So according to 1 Corinthians 11, man is not to cover his head because man is in the image of God, as opposed to woman. That's why even in Genesis 1:27 it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. They were created male and female, but he was created in the image of God. What does it mean to be in the image of God? To look like God. Because when Jesus walked on this earth, he was a man. And God the Father is masculine. And so this is a blasphemous teaching of New Age mysticism, of worshiping, Mother Earth and the female spirit and the goddess and the Kabbalah and the New Age. That's where all this stuff is coming from.
This is the shape of the letter Shin, Hebrew alphabet Shin. Very interesting letter in the language. It's the first letter in the word Shaddai, the first letter in the word Shalom, first letter in the word Shekinah, which is the name of the feminine aspect of God.
Live long and prosper, image of Sirach, Father of all we now hold true.
It's great. It's great. People don't realize they're blessing each other with this. It's great.
Before and after the presidency of Donald Trump, the United States was, and now it is again, on what I would call an intentional trajectory to fulfill what famous Freemason Manly P. Hall described as the secret destiny of America, which includes a future national and global subservience to the God of Freemasonry, a deity that most Americans would not imagine when reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to one nation under God. In fact, the idea by some that the United States was established as a monotheistic Christian nation by those who designed Washington, D.C., and that the God referred to on American currency as a Judeo-Christian one, it's really a puzzling conclusion when reflected against the deistic beliefs of so many of the founding fathers, as you can see perpetually viewed in the so-called supreme architect deism of Freemasons, and in the supreme judge of the world and the divine providence notations that are in the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents, as well as the countless pagan icons that actually dominate the symbols, the statues, the buildings, the seals that were carefully drafted under official government auspices. The Great Seal of the United States, primary among them, which Manly P. Hall, the famous Freemason, rightly called the signature of that exalted body of Masons who designed America for what he called a peculiar and particular purpose. It all bears rich symbolism, forecasting anything but Christianity. As a matter of fact, when Christians in the 1800s argued that a hypothetical annihilation of the United States would lead to antiquaries of succeeding centuries, and by that they meant historians, concluding that America had been a heathen nation based on the symbolism of the Great Seal, Congress was pushed to create something reflecting the Christian faith of so many of of its citizens. U.S. President and Freemason Theodore Roosevelt, he strongly opposed this idea, but other Masons weren't as frustrated with the plan because, given the ambivalence of the term God and the axiom that interpreted within the context of the Great Seal's symbolism, this certainly would not infer the biblical Christian God. Therefore, the slogan "In God We Trust," whoever you believe that God is, was accommodated by Masons and other Illuminatus, who therefore approved as the official U.S. motto the phrase "In God We Trust." In my book, Zenith 2016, which among other things noted that the year of Donald Trump's presidential election had been foreseen by prophets and sages for thousands of years as the apex date, when governments would begin shifting toward the spirit that is predicted on the Great Seal of the United States, the Antichrist, followed by the actual man of sin's arrival and acceptance on the global stage in the year 2025, which people will discover in the new book Zeitgeist 2025. But this was to illustrate the point in my book Zenith 2016 that one definitely would not determine that the God in America's official motto refers to the Father of Jesus or a biblical Trinity. I wrote in that book, quote, "Imagine yourself as a space traveler who visits Earth in a fictional post-apocalyptic world. Digging through the rubble of the once thriving planet, you come across a copy of a U.S. $1 bill with the two-sided Great Seal of the United States joined in the middle by the phrase, 'In God We Trust.' Upon consideration, you ask yourself, what God did this refer to? And with no preconceptions, you allow the symbolism on the seal to speak for itself, from which you quickly determine that this had been a great culture who worshipped Egyptian and Greek deities, especially a particular solar one whose all-seeing eye glares from the top an unfinished Egyptian pyramid. Upon further investigation into the specific beliefs of the strange group whose members had influenced the Great Seal, you discover from their highest masters, including one illustrious Albert Pike, that the sun god they venerated so highly had been known to them at various times in history by the names Apollo, Osiris, and Nimrod, end quote. Now, I made that argument in Zenith 2016 because, unknown to most Americans, and certainly to the average Christian, the Great Seal's mottos and symbolism relate to both Osiris and Apollo specifically, and yet as one. Osiris is the dominant theme of the Egyptian symbols, his resurrection and return, while the mottos of the seal point directly to Apollo, and the eagle, a pagan emblem of Jupiter, to Apollo's father. For instance, the motto Annuet Coeptus, this is from Virgil's Aeneid, in which Ascanius, the son of Aeneas from conquered Troy, prays to Apollo's father, Jupiter or Zeus. Charles Thompson, the designer of the Great Seal's final version, condensed line 625 of Book 9 of Virgil's Aeneid, which reads, Jupiter omnipotus, audacibus annuet coeptus, which means all-powerful Jupiter favors the daring undertaking. He condensed that down to annuet coeptus. He approves our undertaking. While the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages, was adapted in 1782 from inspiration that Thompson found in a prophetic line in Virgil's Eclogue 4, which reads Magnus ab integro seclorum nascitur ordo, from Virgil's Eclogue 4, line 5, the interpretation of the original Latin being, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Now that phrase is from the Cumae Sibyl, a pagan prophetess of Apollo, identified in the Bible as a demonic deceiver, and it involves the future birth of a divine son spawned from a new breed of men sent down from heaven when he receives the life of gods and sees heroes with gods commingling.